I think we're going to start 2 minutes early to make sure we get to the end. And if we get done early, super. But I have a lot of notes to dig through, and there's some really fun stuff in here. I've been looking forward to getting to this point for a bit, so I hope it's interesting to you. It was very interesting to go through. So let's pray and we'll get rolling, okay? Good morning, Lord, and we thank you for the time that we have here together. Thank you again for your scripture. Lord, help us in the next hour to hear your word, to understand, to put it in our heart. And Lord, may we be different because of it. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we are in Romans 11. And just as a quick precursor, again, Paul is writing this book of Romans to the church in Rome. The church is dealing with outside persecution from the Romans. They're dealing with prejudices and conflict inside the church because some of the people are Jewish, some of the people are Gentiles. They bring baggage. Do people ever bring baggage to a relationship and then you kind of have to sort through all that stuff? And so then Paul is trying to mediate all of this. And so we have cultural differences and religious differences, and they were brought up differently. And, honestly, the more I thought about that, the less fun it seemed like for Paul. Like, I don't know if I want to get in the middle of this hot mess. But he did, and he dives right in. And in the end, he's showing how God is putting all these pieces of the puzzle together, and it's very interesting. So, what I want us to do is to try and keep things in context. In other words, try and put yourself in that spot. Try and make yourself get a picture of what it was like to be there. The book of Romans is relative to us today. But when we read through the words, we aren't necessarily thinking of what would it have been like to be there in that place. Christ had just been crucified. He had rose from the dead. He was ascended to heaven. All this is very fresh to them. To us, it's been a long time, right? And we have all this history. They were right in the mix of the Old Testament and all the covenants changing to this new revelation, to the newness of Christ, to something new called being a Christian. Was that something that had been around for any amount of time? These guys were the guinea pigs. So I think if we can put ourselves in context there, it's helpful. Okay? All right. Because of the location, because of the time frame that they were in, their references were always back to the Old Testament, right? Because if you were a Jew in that day, what were you raised with? Only the Old Testament and lots of Jewish tradition, right? But you didn't have anything called the New Testament. And so when Paul keeps slipping in all this Old Testament quotes, paraphrases, references, sometimes we don't catch on to that. That's what they were hanging on to try and make sense out of what Paul was talking about. All right? So let's go back. Romans 11. And we left off with verse 15 last time. And so I just want to read that. For if their rejection brought reconciliation to the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? Paul connects Israel's redemption with the resurrection from the dead. And so hang on to that as we go forward, because is resurrection natural or supernatural? It's supernatural, right? Okay? And so as we think about Israel, is Israel still around? Or are all the tribes there? Think about in the context of this, where were the northern tribes of Israel when Paul's writing this letter? They weren't, right? They had been blasted off to all kinds of places. And so that's what the people in the church are like, well, wait a second. There is, like, part of Israel's missing here. So now if you put resurrection from the dead in there, it makes a little more sense, because what do we have to have happen for these northern tribes to be back in the mix? We have to have something crazy happen called resurrection. Those tribes have to come back from the dead in a sense. Okay? All right. Let's go to 16. I'm going to read a section 16 to 24 here, okay? If the parts of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. If the root is holy, so are the branches. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root, do not consider yourself to be superior to those other branches. If you do, consider this: you do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I could be grafted in. Granted, but they were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but tremble. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. Consider therefore the kindness and sternness of God, sternness to those who fell, but kindness to you, provided that you will continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. And if they do not persist in unbelief, they will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. After all, if you were cut out of an olive tree that is wild by nature, and contrary to nature were grafted into a cultivated olive tree, how much more readily will these, the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? Exclamation point. Okay, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there. What does grafting in olive trees mean to me? Not much, because I don't grow olive trees. What does the dough and first fruits to me mean to me? Not much, because I don't bake dough and I don't give offerings. Did they? Yes. So we got to go back and figure this out a little bit, okay? Otherwise, we're going to cruise right over this and we're not going to catch all the goodies that are inside, okay? So, he starts out talking about the dough, right? If the part of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole branch is holy. What is he talking about? I don't know. Well, let's go back to the Old Testament and figure out what it is. So we're going to go back to Numbers 15. If you go back to Numbers 15, starting in verse 17. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land to which I am taking you." So this is coming out of exile, okay? When you enter the land to which I am taking you, and you eat the food of the land, present a portion as an offering to the Lord. Present a loaf from the first of your ground meal, and present it as an offering from the threshing floor. Throughout the generations to come, you are to give this offering to the Lord from the first of your ground meal. So, what do the people in the Church of Rome know immediately? When he says this, do they have a picture in their head? Yes. Is it probable that they have done this? And is it probable that they learned that because their parents had done it? Is it probable that I didn't have any idea about this if I was an American citizen? Because I don't do a lot of dough baking and I don't wave it before the Lord. Doesn't make sense to me without digging into it, okay? All right, so here's the interesting parts. First of all, that time frame is about 1445, 1444 BC, before Christ. So when Paul says this, he's 1,500 years away from when God told them to do this. And the people in that church would have understood it as soon as he said it, okay? That's important number one. Here's the other thing. In this analogy, A portion of the first batch of dough made from the new harvest is dedicated to God as an offering. That's what Numbers told us, right? The offering dough, this little lump, is taken out of the pile of dough and it's set aside. And so in this analogy, it talks about holiness. Well, holiness in this analogy is set aside. It doesn't mean perfect. It means set aside. So if we take set aside and we think, what did God say about Israel when he chose them, when he picked them? I'm going to set you apart, right? So here's this little piece of dough and it is set apart, and God called it holy. Now keep Israel in your mind, okay? Here's the other fun thing. If you were doing this and you set that apart, and if for some reason that little piece of dough touched the big batch of dough, now the whole thing becomes holy, which is opposite to what you would think. Like, okay, I had this little piece of dough, I set it aside. This is holy, this is separated. Here's the big pile, this is not separated. Does that make sense? And so, logically, and if you think about other things being separated and all the rules of the Old Testament, do not touch and do not go there, and if you do, you're defiled, right? This is the opposite. If this little holy thing touches this big pile over here, this big pile becomes holy. Now, I don't know that off the top of my head, but they did, because that's the culture that they lived in, okay? All right, so that's the first little nugget that I thought was fun. And so then there's this. When the holiness of Jesus touches the Gentiles, they become holy and set apart just like Israel. And that is something that's brand new. When we talk about this new mystery, this new revelation that Paul's trying to explain to believers, this is a piece of that. That these Gentiles are now holy because of Jesus. Okay? All right. And the other piece of this is that Israel being set aside still belongs to God. Okay. Then he moves right from there to this tree analogy. I do not have my degree in horticulture, so I don't understand all the tree things, okay? I forgot to give you my little pile of dough.
Does that have anything to do with the tithe? That's kind of where my mind would go, is the first fruits, the first of the dough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could spend 2 hours just talking about the dough piece and why he did it. And what are the other lessons inside of that, right? That when God shows up and he supplies your needs, how are we to show that we're thankful? If we really trust that God supplied our needs, the lesson that he gives us is what? Give a little bit of that away. Help somebody else. Tithe a little bit of that back. Why? Instead of being a hoarder, I'm going to give a little bit of that away because it is an act of trust. And that act of trust is that God showed up for me. He sustained me, right? And you can give part of that back as an offering to the Lord in thankfulness. And also there is a sense that says, hey, my God showed up. And I can either hoard it or I can say, you know what, my God's going to show up again and I'm going to give you a little bit of what he gave me back. Is it all his to begin with? Yes. Okay, there's a whole other thing going on there too. All right, back to the trees. Let's go to the trees. So we have the tree analogy that starts at the end of 16. If the root is holy, so are the branches. And then he starts talking about the branches being broken off, okay? So, this is an olive tree. I've got a few pictures here that I want to show you. These specific pictures are coming from the Mount of Olives. So that's where these specific trees are in the pictures that I'm going to show you. Well, why does it matter? What do we know about the Mount of Olives? Well, first of all, historically, it's an important place. Number two, it's still there, okay? And where is Christ going to come back to? The Mount of Olives. Okay, so all that's really cool. Let's get a couple more things worked out here, okay? So Paul uses grafting as a metaphor to describe the inclusion of the Gentiles into the covenant of God. With the wild, who are the wild olive shoots? That would be you. Right? Okay? Now, who is really into the tree thing and the horticulture, and who's done grafting before? Is anybody? Mom's done a little tiny bit. Has anybody else tried it? Did it work? No? Is grafting hard? Apparently. Okay, again, I don't know anything about grafting, and so this was all kind of new to me, but it is very interesting. Let's keep going. So the wild olive shoots in this particular case, and so look at the tree. Let me show you a couple more things. So again, this is in the Mount of Olives. They actually have this all fenced off, and I'm going to just go back and forth here a little bit. Here's another one. What's your first reaction when you look at this part of the tree? And if you weren't far away, I'll just tell you my first reaction. This tree is gnarly.
That's what I was going to say.
Right? It looks beat up. It looks old, like really old. And when you think of old trees like that, I think of hardwood. Not softwood that grows up really, really fast like a popple tree. That's because I'm in Minnesota, northern Minnesota. We have popple trees everywhere. They grow like grass. If you forget to mow your lawn next year, guess what you're going to have growing in your yard? Popple trees. How fast do they grow? Like several feet every year, right? Who's got an ironwood tree in their property somewhere? What do we think about ironwood trees?
They live up to their name.
Yeah, you hit them with a chainsaw and everything but sparks are flying, right? It's hard, and they grow slow, and they're very dense. Well, I look at the olive tree, and that's what I think too, that it's hard, and it takes a long time to grow. Now, if you look closer, and I'm getting all out of sorts with my notes, but this is what I want you to see. You got the big, gnarly trunk, right? And then what do you have coming out of the side of this thing in a very random place?
A branch.
This nice, new little branch. Okay? All right. I don't want to get so far ahead of myself that I make this more confusing than it is. So Paul's using grafting as a metaphor to describe the inclusion of the Gentiles into the tree, into the covenant of God. And he uses the word wild shoots, okay? Because it's not natural for a wild shoot. Let me rephrase that. It isn't normal. There's nothing normal about what's going on here. Let me keep going on my notes, so I'm going to trip over myself. This illustration shows grafting can merge two distinct entities into one, okay? And produce, and into a productive whole, much like the horticulture practice. So, first of all, it's customary to add or graft a shoot into a tree because they want it to bear fruit. Now, if you can skip last Sunday and get to the Sunday before, we spent quite a bit of time talking about infidelity. And we used the word faithfulness as fidelity, okay? And part of faithfulness is bearing fruit. We talked about that quite a bit, okay? So now take that. Faithfulness is bearing fruit. Israel was faithful or unfaithful? Unfaithful. And so they were not bearing fruit. And so think back to what in the world is Paul doing here? The people in the church would have understood. If an olive tree is not bearing fruit, what's going to happen? They're going to start to graft in. First of all, they're going to cut branches off that are not producing fruit. Why? Because it's a waste of space. And the sap that's coming out of the root is wasting its energy on something that's doing nothing. If my business is to grow olives, and part of the tree is not producing fruit, what am I going to do with it? I'm going to change what happens there, okay? And so that's where the horticulture comes in and the grafting comes in. That would take a natural shoot from another tree that was producing, it would cut off a branch that was not producing, and it would plug in this branch, okay? A farmer would never take a wild olive shoot and plant it into a natural tree, okay? He wouldn't do that because is it going to give him what he wants? What he wants is productivity. What he wants is olives, good olives, just like the rest of the tree is producing, but this part is not, okay? Am I making sense? So you're not going to put a wild branch on that because you don't want the bad to influence what is good. And so, again, what is Paul saying to these people? He's trying to explain this mystery of God and how God is going to take Gentiles and plug them into what? The tree.
What is the tree? What is the tree?
The tree is Israel.
Yep.
Okay? And we'll get, there's some more here. We'll get there. Give me a second, okay? But I want us to hang on to that because I don't get that when I read this. All I get is they chopped off a branch and they put another branch up there. Can you do that, Rick? Well, yeah, you can. And that was normal practice for them to do that. And the purpose was to bear fruit. That was to get more productivity. It was to get fruit out of the tree. So there's all these little things that we got to hang on to as we're moving forward, right? They were chopped off because they weren't faithful. In other words, they weren't bearing fruit. They got all that just like that. I got all that in about 20 hours of going through it, okay? All right. Think back to Matthew about the fig tree in Matthew. It wasn't bearing fruit, right? Okay, so for us, we have one more place that we can go look, but they got it right away from the Old Testament. Okay, some more fun stuff about olive trees. Olive trees live between 500 and 700 years. How long do our trees live around here? People brag, you know what? I got a white pine tree on my property that's 165 years old. Ooh. Olive trees produce fruit for 200 years. That's a long time. How long does an apple tree last? If you got a really old apple tree, how old is it?
30.
Think of we've seen some big, huge apple trees, right? They gotta be 50 years old, don't they? And are they all gnarly and stuff? Like, an apple tree is real gnarly. At least the ones that we had one at the office that was like that, and it always looked terrible. It always looked like it was trying to die, and then all of a sudden it would have apples. And then it did die. But anyways, okay. Here's the other thing. Some olive trees have lived 2,000 to 3,000 years. And in this particular case, in the Mount of Olives, some of these trees have been dead, like producing nothing, for 400 years. And when we were there a few years back, all of a sudden you've got these little shoots that are coming out of the tree, and it's coming back to life. Think of Israel. You can burn an olive tree, and it'll come back. You can cut parts of the olive tree off, and it'll come back. And that's not, I don't know that if I'm just reading through this quickly. I don't get any of that. But they did, because that was their world. Okay? All right, interesting stuff. So, here we are, Mount of Olives, and these trees are waking up. How come? Because. Okay? All right. How about, this is another thing. When you want to go plant an olive orchard, you would cut off the branch of a good tree and you would put it in the ground, and it would grow into a tree, and it would be a clone of the tree you cut the branch from. Okay? But that's not what they normally do when you have an olive farm. You take branches from a good tree and you graft it into trees that aren't bearing fruit to get those trees to produce. Okay? So you wouldn't normally plant, like if an olive tree is dead, or you think it's dead, you would graft branches in. You wouldn't just go plug one in the ground. So again, I don't know that normally, okay? So again, I think I talked about this, but the grafting in this example, the branches are cut off because of infidelity or lack of fruit. I want us to make sure we get that. And so these wild branches are grafted in. Gentiles are being grafted in to this tree called Israel, okay? Does that make sense to them? Again, make sure your answer is no, because that's not what they did on their own olive tree, okay? It's the opposite. Now we start to understand why Paul calls it a mystery, and we'll get to that at the end of the chapter, okay? All right, and so to be clear, this makes no sense, but that's what God's doing, okay? All right. But back to the tree. In this example, in this case, the root of the tree is so good and the sap coming out of the root is so good and it produces that it will change the wild branches. The opposite of what they're used to, right? The tree matters. God's going to preserve the tree. Okay? And so God has to do unconventional things to make that happen. If you go to verse 16, just one more thing I want to bring up about this. 7. I'll get there. Here we go. At 16, the very first word. Do you guys have the word if there? Yeah. Okay. So I looked up in the Cambridge Bible for schools and colleges, it says that it would prefer if that word was but or now. And so if we read that, but the part of the dough, or now that part of the dough, not if like vague, it's like more, it's more for sure, okay? That now when it happens. So I'm going to read a little piece to you that I took out of here because I can't explain it better than this, but don't get lost in my droning voice, okay? It's much better if you use but or now. The word marks transition to a new fact in connection with the receiving of Israel. The fact of the peculiar position of the Jews with regard to divine promise. The main effect of the following passage, this goes ahead to Romans 11:24, is to prove that the restoration of the Jews to the church of Messiah, so far from being unlikely, is in the nature of the case likely. So again, it's not normal, but God did something unconventional. That makes it normal. Okay? Their peculiar connection by lineal descent with the fathers of the Jews were, so we go back to the heritage, the patriarchs, right? Who would that be? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right? Okay. Their return makes it certain that their return will be as abundantly welcome to their God as the admission of the Gentiles. We might say more welcome, but for the fact that no welcome can be fuller than that which awaits the true believer of whatever nation. But Paul wishes to meet the rising prejudice. We talked about that. He's in this church of prejudice, right? Okay? Of Gentiles now against Jewish believers by emphasizing the grand fact that the whole church springs, so to speak, from a Jewish root. And thus nothing could be, in a certain sense, more natural than the restoration of Jews to the church. So Paul is using both sides of this to bring Gentiles into the Jews, to bring the Jews into the Gentiles, all under the umbrella that God has this mystery that he is doing in an unconventional way. So I know that's confusing. I think it's supposed to be confusing. Why? Because we serve a really big God that can do whatever he wants, right? Okay. All right. And then Paul goes on to borrow from Jeremiah, but Gentiles be faithful or you'll be cut off too. And we're gonna go forward and look at that in a second here. So Gentiles are grafted in, Israel can be regrafted in. Let's go to his reference, Jeremiah 11. Jeremiah 11, 16 to 23. And again, they know their Old Testament, okay? So when Paul just uses a phrase out of Jeremiah, they would have picked that up, and we would cruise right past it. The Lord called you a thriving olive tree with fruit beautiful in form, but with the roar of a mighty storm he will set it on fire, and its branches will be broken. The Lord Almighty who planted you has decreed disaster for you, because the people of both Israel and Judah, which I find that super interesting because we showed that dividing line between the northern and southern kingdoms last time, have done evil and aroused my anger by burning incense to Baal. So he is showing Israel here as a green olive tree. And then there's this little piece that shows this postlude of God's grace. And again, out of the Old Testament. So what Jeremiah is talking to part of the tribes of Israel, and why is he talking to them? Because they got messed up with the Assyrian captivity, right? And so they had disobeyed God. God took the Assyrians and he grabbed a bunch of them and took them out of the land. And Judah, what happened to them? They got grabbed by Babylon and they got taken into exile for a while too, right? But inside of that is this little redemptive story again. So, let me get to my notes. That redemptive story comes out of the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. And we talked about some of this when we were going through Daniel. After the Babylonian captivity ended, God allowed a remnant of the men of Anathoth to come back and return to their land. Who's that? You wouldn't know that if you were just zooming through Romans. You wouldn't catch any of that, would you? Some of you are probably Old Testament scholars, and I shouldn't assume that you wouldn't know that. I will just, when I say those things, just say, Rick didn't know that, okay? 128 men of Anathoth returned under the leadership of Zerubbabel in Ezra 2:23. The fun part about this, these people got taken out, and God brought back 128 men from that tribe. Would you call that a remnant? A small remnant, right? Have we heard that theme before? We have, okay? And God brings them back, and we come to Nehemiah 11:32. We can go there, just so you know I'm not lying. Oops. All right, Nehemiah 11:32. What's the very first name in that verse? The people of Anathoth, okay? And then if you go over to Nehemiah 10:29, if you back up a page, we have this. All these now join their fellow Israelites, the nobles, and bind themselves with a curse and an oath to follow the law of God, given through Moses, the servant of God, and to obey carefully all the commands, regulations, and decrees of the Lord. And I think this was when we were Was it when you were in Matthew or when you were going through the life of David, maybe? We were in this chapter, and basically it's a spot where the people are taken out and they're saying, we promise that we will be faithful, that we will have fidelity to God, and that we will bear fruit for him, okay? I just bring that up because it's just this little story of the men of Anathoth shows up that even in judgment, God brings back mercy. And we talked about that a lot when we started in Romans 8 and went forward, okay? All right, let's go back to Romans. In 11:25. Okay, this little section is the mystery revealed, Israel's national salvation. 25. I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. All right, what are we going to do with that? Think of eschatology. Think of Israel's importance today, in the past. Will they be important in the future? Depends on your eschatology, right? So we have some opinions all packed into just a couple of verses here. In verse 25, it talks about the partial hardening until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. Okay, fullness of the Gentiles, that term only occurs one other time, and it's in Genesis. And if I'm cruising through this, I read fullness of the Gentiles. Great, what does that mean? I suppose it means all the Gentiles. Where is this coming from? I don't know. If I'm Paul and I throw that in there, what does Paul know? His Old Testament. What do the people in the church know? Their Old Testament. So let's go back. Genesis 48. I thought this was super fun. Genesis 48. Okay, what's going on in Genesis 48? I'm going to read, I think, 12 through 20. In Genesis 48, we're reconnecting Joseph to his dad, right? And Joseph has his two boys with him. And dad is not doing well. He's old. He knows he's going to die soon. And so what do we know from our Sunday school? We know that there was a blessing that was passed down, right? And the blessing would go to who first? The oldest girl, the oldest son, okay? All right, so just to throw this out there before we start, was Joseph the oldest son in his family? Can God do whatever he wants? Okay. All right, let's start there. 48, and we're going to start with 12. And again, his name is Israel, okay? And he is introduced to his grandsons for the first time. I get choked up a couple times going through this. It is super cool. Part of this is because I just lost my dad, but there is some heritage in here that is so deep that we need to grab a hold of it, okay? And so I want to paint this picture. Grandpa has not seen his grandkids ever. How important was family to these people? Was it second or was it first? Okay, so we need to grab that, okay? This is so impactful for Grandpa. Do the grandkids understand it? I don't know. They're little, right? But does Grandpa? Yeah. I actually wrote in my Bible at the end of verse 11, I don't even know when I wrote this in there, but I put the word joy because that's what's going on here, okay? So let's try getting through this. Israel said to Joseph, father-son relationship here, okay? I never expected to see your face again. And now God has allowed me to see your children. This is a big deal, okay? And then Joseph removed them from Israel's knees, and he bowed down with his face to the ground. Think about this moment for his son getting to be reunited with his dad, okay? And Joseph took both of them, Ephraim, which was his son, right? Ephraim on his right, toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh on his left, toward Israel's right hand, and brought them close to him. But Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head. He switched. Are you catching that? Okay? Joseph set this whole thing up just like he wants it to. Again, was Joseph the firstborn? No. But is he going to make sure that this blessing goes down exactly according to tradition? Yes. And what does dad do? Okay? We got a problem, Houston? We do, in Joseph's mind, okay? And he brought them close to him, but Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head. Though he was the younger, and crossing his arms, he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. And then he blessed Joseph and said, when I go through this, I'm going to insert a few things, and we'll try and just don't get mad at me if it's like, wait a minute, Rick, you just inserted a word, okay? All right? May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked faithfully. God there is eternal. May my eternal God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked faithfully. Faithfully, what did we just say about that word? Faithfully and fidelity. What is that? I want us to hang on to that, okay? It looks different. It feels different, okay? Think of the Marine Corps if you need to. Whatever it takes, I will never, ever, ever be unfaithful to you, okay? The God who has been my shepherd. What is a shepherd? When he says my right there, it is personal. It is individual, okay? My personal shepherd. What did a shepherd do? He protected you. He was your caregiver. He was your provider. This is so personal. The eternal God is my provider. He is my caregiver. Okay? All my life to this day. This is Grandpa Israel bragging about his God to his grandkids. Dang it. Guys, you need to brag to your grandkids about your God. Right? Holy smokes. Okay? The angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. Can you feel that? My eternal God, will you please bless my boys? Please? That blessing there is a blessing of an inheritance. Think back. What was the inheritance of Israel? What was his inheritance? His inheritance was this covenant with God. God, listen, he didn't make the covenant with God. God made the covenant with him. And on top of that, put fidelity in there. Put a God who is eternal. Put a God who is my caretaker. Put my God in there who will never, ever, ever be unfaithful to me. Think back to Hosea. You cheated on me, and I still love you. Do you get all that if you just zoom through Romans 11 and don't come back here? No. I didn't. This is fantastic. And this little prayer right here, dads, grandpas, this little prayer right here should be prayed over your family. Do we need more guys to stand up, to have a backbone, to be leaders? right? To be moral leaders, to be business leaders, to be fiscal leaders, to be spiritual leaders. Is that what's going to change us? Yes. It all goes back 1,500 years from this letter to Rome. And that's what he's standing on. That's what he's trying to get to these people. Okay? All right. I'm having a hard time seeing. In the names of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and may they increase greatly on the earth. He's asking for success here. Okay? In every way that you can think. All right? That's the blessing that he's praying over his grandkids. Father God, my eternal God, make these little boys successful. Isn't that awesome? When Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased. And so he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to him, "No, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." And what happens? But his father refused. And he said, I know, my son. As a son, do I like it when my dad says, I know you're mad. Deal with it. I'm still the dad. Okay? It's not what Joseph wants here, right? I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become now get this piece right here, a group of nations. That's what my version says. Does anybody else have something different? A multitude of nations. Anybody else got anything different? Fullness of the nations. This is the phrase that Paul used in Romans. Okay? Okay, just to lighten the mood a little bit. I said this happened in around 14. Did I tell you that wrong? I have a spot in my notes where it says 1900 to 1700 BC, so I might have told you that wrong. But, okay, here's just a little Rick joke, okay? Whether it was 1400 or 1900 years, it was a long time before the book of Romans was written. It was BC, okay? Right hand and left hand. Why is that important? The left hand is what you wiped your butt with. That was BC, and only in this context is before Charmin. Okay? All right? So, let it go if you're mad at me. It's fine. It's just a poop joke. Okay? So, left hand was what you wiped your butt with. The right hand was what you ate with. You ever seen pictures from Eastern people that are scooping the food out with their hand? Okay? What would you never do? You would never confuse which hand you ate with after you wiped your butt. Okay? All right. I just thought that was interesting. In this case, Grandpa switches his arms. Okay? The younger brother will be greater, is what it says. In Hebrew, you would read it like this: his seed will become the fullness of the nations. And Paul went and dropped this in to Romans. I don't want us to miss that. Okay? Ephraim becomes the ruling tribe of what kingdom? The northern kingdom. What tribes are missing when Paul writes this book? The northern kingdom. Now we got fullness of the nations, fullness of the Gentiles coming from this. And is this a mystery to them? It has to be a mystery. Why? Because they primarily don't exist. Okay? Do we have a problem? We do. So what is he saying? The northern tribes have assimilated into the countries that they were sent to. They've assimilated with who? The Gentiles. in that region. Right? God has to bring them back in. So now we're starting to get a grasp about what this mystery is. Okay? All right. Paul's saying here, if all Israel is going to be saved, it cannot just be the southern kingdoms. We spent a lot of time talking about the southern kingdom and people in the southern kingdom being called Jews. It has to include the northern kingdom. And so when the nations receive the Spirit, in this case Jesus, when Jesus' Spirit shows up, Christ has been here, Christ has died, the Holy Spirit has now come on believers, right? So now I'm getting way ahead of myself here, but when it talks about their word will be written on their heart, how does that happen? And the Holy Spirit goes inside here. That's how it's written on your heart. Can that happen without being saved? It can't, right? Okay? All right. Gentiles are being grafted into Israel, becoming Israelites. This is how Israel is coming back from the dead. And even in a simple way, today, if you were going to switch to Judaism, can you do that? Can you become a Jew today? Yes. Matter of fact, I was listening to a group of guys talk, and the guy is actually a college professor, and he grew up Jewish. And they were in college, and he had a couple other Jewish roommates, and they married Jewish ladies. He married a Gentile lady, and now the only two that are actually practicing Judaism is this guy and his wife, who really wasn't a Jew because she wasn't born that way. I say that because the friends, the joke was that when they get together, the friends will be like, well, your wife's not Jewish. And he's like, well, to be fair, we're the only two that are actually practicing Judaism. And so then he goes back to this whole grafting in piece. And so I may have just derailed everything I was talking about there, but it just popped into my head. So, okay. Oh boy. We got to go to Ezekiel. Ezekiel 20. 34. I will bring you from the nations and gather you from the countries where you have been scattered. Now we think historically, did God scatter them? He sure did. And I just like how it is also gathering you from the nations. We talked about, I think it was last time we were together, we talked about Ezekiel and the dry bones in Ezekiel 37. Ezekiel's vision there is about the whole house of Israel, not just the two northern and southern kingdoms, okay? Let's go to Ezekiel 37. And again, Paul just got done using the grafting image, okay? So let's go to Ezekiel 37. Because they're Old Testament scholars. Starting in verse 15. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, take a stick of wood and write on it, belonging to Judah. Who's Judah? The southern kingdom. And the Israelites associated with him. And then take another stick of wood and write on it, belonging to Joseph, that is, to Ephraim. Who's Ephraim? The northern kingdoms. Okay? And all the Israelites associated with him. Join them together into one stick, so that they will become one in your hand. And when your people ask you, won't you tell us what you mean by this? Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am going to take the stick of Joseph, which is in Ephraim's hand, and of the Israelite tribes associated with him. And that's going to be how many tribes? The northern 10, primarily, okay? And join it to Judah's stick. I will make them into a single stick of wood, and they will become one in my hand. Hold before their eyes the sticks you have written on, and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will take the Israelites out of the nations where they have gone, and I will gather them from all around and bring them back into their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. There's probably some more there that we could talk about in terms of the land and the mountains, and it's specific to the mountains in that land. There will be one king over them, and they will never again be two nations or divided into two kingdoms. They will no longer defile themselves with their idols and vile images or with any of the offenses, for I will save them from all their sinful backsliding, and I will cleanse them. They will be my people, and I will be their God. It's interesting how this is all blending together, and how that Old Testament, as Paul is bringing paraphrases and verses and specific phrases, and he's dropping them in to the Roman book, and all this history is in the Old Testament that I didn't understand. I didn't catch all that. So I thought that was super fun. Let's see. Let's see if we can finish in a few minutes here. Let's go back to Romans. I think we're halfway through 26. The deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob. And this is my covenant, or this is my promise with them, when I take away their sins. As far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies for your sake. But as far as the election is concerned, they are loved on account of the patriarchs. Who's the patriarchs? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, okay? For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. Just as you, who were at one time disobedient to God, have now received mercy as a result of their disobedience, so they too have now become disobedient, in order that they too may now receive mercy as a result of God's mercy to you. This is how Paul's fixing this. Listen, God showed mercy to them, and he showed mercy to you. What in the world are you fighting about? God can do any unconventional thing he wants to. He has brought out a remnant. He has shown forgiveness to people who were unfaithful. Why do you fight with each other? You should all be jumping for joy right now, right? We need to take that and stuff it into Mildred Bible Chapel, right? We're lucky to be here. Lucky is a really terrible word. We're blessed to be here. We're fortunate to be here. We're here because of mercy, right? Okay. For God has bound everyone over to disobedience, so that he may have mercy on them all. And that goes back to thinking about the example that we used of the potter and the clay, and God's hands working through the clay. And what did we say about clay? It's stubborn. And what did we say about who has ever resisted the will of God? And at first you would think, well, nobody, because God's big and I'm little. And then we talked through that, and what did we figure out? Everybody's resisted the will of God. And what did God do with that? He molded, and he made, and he pushed here, and he pulled here. And in all of that showed his mercy, and his faithfulness, and his goodness. Right? Man, that's good stuff. Okay. Let's just read the doc. There's more in there. There's some. If you want to go, you can go look at Isaiah 59, 20 to 21. Talks about that the Redeemer will come to Zion. That was written to the southern tribes, by the way. Jeremiah 31, 33 to 34. Talks about the new covenant being tied to national forgiveness. Ezekiel 36, 25 to 27. The cleansing and spirit giving at a national restoration level. And then we come to Romans 11, 28 to 32. And it talks about God's mercy being the final word, which I love. And that it's irrevocable. That Israel is still beloved by their father. That it's an everlasting covenant with Abraham that came from Genesis 17:7. And then we just talked about the clay analogy. Again, Israel refused to obey God. God used that disobedience to be merciful to us, right? And sending Christ. Israel's disobedience brought salvation to the nations. The salvation of the nations will save Israel. It's a wild back and forth going on there. Okay? All right. And so in the end, we get to the doxology, and what is Paul basically saying? This is a crazy, unpredictable, marvelous plan. Let's read it. Oh, the depths of the riches of the wisdom and the knowledge of God, how unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. If you're thinking Old Testament, does Job come to your mind? What happened when Job starts to argue with God? God says, where were you when I did boom, 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 right? Okay? Who has known the mind of the Lord? Or who has been his counselor? Who was ever given to God that God should repay them? And here is the climax of the last bunch of weeks that we've been talking through this piece of Romans. For from him and through him and for him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. What a fantastic way to finish that. God can do whatever he wants. And in the end, even if we can't see it today, he's going to be glorified through it, right? Amen. We are done. Man, and it only was 1 minute past due. Good stuff. Thanks for being here.